What? Who's there? Ah, come closer. I was just composing a little concerto here. No, not too close. Keep that candle away. No, don't touch the mask. Don't remove it. Ah, now you've done it. Feast your eyes. Glut your soul on my accursed ugliness. Well, actually, my mother thinks I'm quite handsome. Welcome back to the Sanctum. Well, as Halloween fast approaches here, I thought I'd throw together a little episode to take a look at some Halloween costumes. And so I thought it might be fun to take a look at some of the costumes based on the Phantom of the Opera and inspired by the Phantom of the Opera. Out of the hellfire of horror unimaginable rises the figure of terror incarnate, in an episode we like to call Masquerades of the Musical Maestro of Menace. Judy! Dear God, they've heard his voice! This episode has to be destroyed. Now, as a boxed Halloween costume, the Phantom of the Opera didn't reach the level of popularity that Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, Dracula, and even the creature from the Black Lagoon did. But it was represented, especially early on in the monster craze. And as well it should. The Phantom of the Opera, after all, is the great-grandfather of the Universal Monster Cycle. And my two favorite Phantom costumes show up very early on in the early 1960s at the start of the monster craze. Now, the first item we're going to take a look at here is the mask from the Halco Phantom of the Opera costume. Halco, as we discussed last year in our episode The Frankenstein Files, got the Universal license early on, in 1961. They made a Frankenstein costume, a Phantom of the Opera, and a Wolfman. Now, sadly, I don't have the box or costume for this. I just happened to pick up the mask along the way. But it is a really cool mask, and the thing I always like about the Halco masks is the paint style they do on them. It's sort of this neon, funhouse, carnival, dark ride quality to the masks that Halco has. Very different from what Ben Cooper and Collegeville will do later on down the line. And this is clearly the Chaney Phantom as portrayed by James Cagney. Again, we're talking pre-internet era here, so a lot of these designers were working off photos that were supplied to them from the studios. And most of the Phantom properties back then were actually based on James Cagney's representation of the Phantom from The Man with a Thousand Faces. But this still has a Lon Chaney quality to it, but yet you can see Cagney shining through here. Got that upturned pig nose. And like I said, again, look at these beautiful paints on it that have stayed this bright throughout the years. Again, we're talking, this is around 1961 this came out. He's got this strange greenish hair. And of course, this looks fantastic under a black light, very psychedelic. I just love the art and design that went into these, even though they're very simple, virgin vinyl, vacuform masks. There's something so amazing about them to me, and that's probably why they speak to me and why I still collect them all these years later. I didn't have enough Halloweens in my life, and now through these costumes I can have hundreds and hundreds of Halloweens all year long. Now, sadly, I don't own the box or costume, but I have seen pictures of it online, and it's a very interesting looking costume. As a matter of fact, it appears that the makers were initially going for Dracula. It's a tuxedo, which could double for Dracula or the Phantom, but it appears to be a Dracula tuxedo, and there's a picture on the tuxedo that is very clearly Dracula. I don't know if this is a case that the makers at Halco didn't know the difference between Dracula and the Phantom, or if they couldn't get the rights to Dracula and instead went with the Phantom. And if anybody has a lead on the boxed costume or smock or a complete version of this, please reach out to me. Now, in 1963, Ben Cooper would acquire the Universal Pictures license, and they would immediately go to work producing costumes of Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, and the Mummy. But a few years later, they delve deeper into the Universal vaults and make this costume we see here before us, the Phantom of the Opera. This is from that prime period of the monster craze, when they were making really cool monster stuff. The early to mid 60s. There was just so much cool monster merch out there. Case in point, this is one of them. And this is the classic Ben Cooper pumpkin box. It just screams Halloween. It's got all the Halloween colors there. You've got orange and yellow, and we've got that jack-o'-lantern with the mask of the Phantom of the Opera poking out through the top. And of course, we've got that classic, iconic Ben Cooper trademark up there with those fantastic font in those letters. It says Masquerade Costume, and I love the font that costume is in, giving it clearly a Monster Kid appeal. Really great mid-century modern graphics on this with those little yellow and orange diamonds as well. Now, I'm not really going to delve into the history of the films or the actors here and there that played the various Phantoms. I have a companion piece I'll be doing later on to showcase the Phantom of the Opera, discuss the films, and show some of the toys. But I wanted to get this episode out for Halloween, so I want to just showcase these costumes and talk about the costumes in general. Now, I know I say this about every costume I showcase, but this is one of the favorites in my collection. And it was really hard to come by, and I don't pull it out enough to take a look at, so I'm glad I get to share it here at Halloween. Now, the cellophane is a little worse for wear on this one, which is often the case in these old costumes, but the box itself is in really good condition. Take a quick gander at the box here. You've got that great Ben Cooper font in orange there. Phantom of the Opera, Universal Pictures Company. It's a large, size 12 to 14, all rayon. Really nice condition, this box. And then the side, Masquerade Costume. Again, that cool creature feature font. And you've got the kid that owned it here is named Jim Winter. Again, I love this stuff. I love the patina on these. Yes, I said patina. Drink every time I say patina in an episode. I know people want stuff mint in box, but this stuff gives it soul. It means that a kid owned this and wore it. It was out there on some All Hallows Eve being worn. I really love that stuff. And the thing I really like about the pumpkin boxes, of course, are that you can see the mask poking out there through the porthole or the top of the pumpkin. Now, clearly this costume was important to Jim, so important that he wrote his name twice on it. He's also got it down here in the corner. And that's probably because he brought it to school for the big costume parade, which is a thing that just doesn't seem to happen anymore. Kids can still wear their costumes to school, but they don't have the big costume parade. It was always my favorite day to go to school on Halloween, to see what other costumes the other kids were wearing. And I miss those old costume parades as much as I miss these old boxed costumes. Now here's the mask out of the box. It's got that great Ben Cooper paint job on it. Almost like a ghoulish yellow, green. He's got those neon style lips. Phantom-like hair. Now this one is kind of based on the Cagney Chaney, but it appears much more to me like the Lon Chaney Jr. Phantom. And this one actually still has the rubber band on it. Condition of the vinyl behind it is really nice. This mask does not have too many cracks on it. It's got a few paint marks and paint scuffs. And like the other Ben Cooper costumes, this one had a rack mask as well. Now, the costume itself had a brief run. I believe it came out in 1965. That's what mine is dated. I don't see it in the 64 catalog, and in the 66 catalog, it does appear, but with a different smock. I think it lasted right up until about 1968-69, thereabouts. Wasn't quite as popular as all the other monster costumes like Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy, and the Wolfman. Now, I know this costume didn't exist into the 70s because I actually went out as the Phantom of the Opera, and I would have worn this if they had it, but I had to make my own costume. I wore my mom's petticoat as a tuxedo jacket, a Dracula cape, black pants, and black shoes. And then for my face, I did a combination of all the Phantoms. I put the green ghoulish makeup on to represent Chaney because that's what I thought he looked like based on famous monsters and all the other monster merch I had seen. And then I actually did the Herbert Lom Phantom scar. I traced my hand around my eye and sort of colored it in all red and bloody. And then I wanted so bad a Claude Rains Phantom mask because I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, not knowing that they didn't make it back then. I asked my mom to go out and get me a mask for the Phantom, hoping she would return with that. She comes home with a Lone Ranger style mask. So that's what I had to wear. Now that costume was great, but I would have absolutely loved this. And later on in life, as I got older and took my daughter out trick-or-treating, I would be the Phantom once again. And this time I would try and make myself up like the Halco Phantom. Now, the smock in the 66 catalog is a bit different from this initial 65 run. And Ben Cooper had a habit of doing that, altering smocks, changing them, having variations. We saw that when we looked at all the different Frankenstein costumes last year. But this initial 65 costume is beautiful. It's an absolute work of art, and we're going to take a look at it here right now. Now, these are always so difficult to shoot, so pay no attention to the junk behind the curtain. It will show up in a later episode of Dr. Durant's Sanctum, or be given away when I die. And I have to say, this is one of my favorite of the early monster smocks. This smock is so cool. You've got the Phantom here in this cool tuxedo with this giant medallion around his neck with a picture of himself on it. And what I really love about this one is that is very clearly the Maniac-style representation of the Phantom. Maniac being M-A-N-I-Y-A-C-K. Maniac was a company that produced cool monster iron-ons in the early 1960s, and they had great representations of the Mummy, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and the Phantom of the Opera. And that's what that is on the smock right there. And again, you've got the Phantom in ghoulish green. I love the green Phantom for some reason. Don't know why they didn't translate it to the mask. They kept the mask yellow, but they had the green Phantom on the smock. He's got the bloodshot eyes and the blood red lips and that cool Phantom of the Opera font around the medallion. And having that Maniac-style representation of the Phantom on there makes this a perfect combination of early 60s monster merch. You've got a Ben Cooper monster costume with a Maniac-style monster on it. Just adds to the level of coolness of this piece. And take a look at that smock. Now that smock is clearly giving off Dracula vibes, similar to the Halco one. Now, I know the Phantom and Dracula both wear tuxedos, so they can get away with that, and they both wear capes. But the red line cape is something that you usually see on Dracula costumes. The medallion there could clearly be Dracula's medallion, and Dracula would wear skull's head buttons. But you've got two little bats up on the lapels there. And I'm wondering if this was an early version of something they were trying to do for a Dracula costume. They nixed it, and later on down the line, they repurposed it for a Phantom of the Opera costume. And perhaps some of these guys just didn't know the difference between the Phantom of the Opera and Dracula. Who knows? But it's a very cool piece, and I love the tie up there, the tie tying the cape around the neck. It's in the Phantom colors of red and green. So between that Maniac-style representation of the Phantom, the cool early 60s style Ben Cooper smock, and that terrific scary mask, and you've got a perfect witch's brew of early 60s Monster Kid merch. I love it. Now here's another Phantom rack mask. This is a Ben Cooper one, similar to the one we just saw in the Ben Cooper box there. It's another one I picked up along the way. I bought it because it was in pristine condition, and I really just love this mask so much. And you can see it's a little bit different. And that was sometimes the case. You got different variations. He's got these little paint marks on the side there. This paint on this is a little bit nicer, a little bit glossier, but it's very early on in the run because you can see there it says 29 cents Ben Cooper. And this beautiful vinyl, I love the way this feels, but this one is in pristine condition. I really do love that initial run of the Ben Cooper monsters, and there's something about the Phantom of the Opera, the early versions of the Phantom of the Opera, that scream Monster Kid to me. Next up, we have this Halco rack mask of the Phantom. Now, I don't think this was an officially licensed Phantom of the Opera mask, but clearly this is based on Lon Chaney's Phantom. It is an oversized rack mask. These masks were really big. They're built of a harder plastic or vinyl than the traditional Ben Cooper or Collegeville masks, or even some of the masks that appeared in the Halco costumes. There was a variety of these made over the years, and actually different companies made them, so it's kind of hard to track down when you get a version which version you have. I believe this is the Halco version. It's clearly one from the early 60s. And you would see ads for these in catalogs, the back of comic books, and this is a really gruesome version of the Phantom. He's really detailed. He's got these dark, deep pitted eyes, and then the top of his head, the skin is splitting away from his skull. This is not unlike how I look after I finish filming an episode at 3 in the morning, wandering up the stairs and catching myself in the mirror, going, how did I cut myself? Did I hit my head? I don't remember hitting my head. Looks awful. The hell's wrong with me? But this is a really cool mask. They made a variety of these based on movies. There's this Phantom one. There's a sea creature one that's based on the creature from the Black Lagoon. And then there is one that is clearly based on the Morlock from George Pal's The Time Machine. And as you can see, this is a really oversized mask. This would fit an adult. It would still fit me. Elastic band's still on there. I don't know if that's the original or if somebody put that on there because it's a very different style of elastic. The plastic or the vinyl on this is a much sturdier vinyl, but it's a little bit brittle. And this mask, it's deep. It's really deep. It really is vacuum formed. You can see the hole there from the process. And you can check out Eric or the Phantom's gruesome head wound. It's like friggin' deli meat. Oh, this is disgusting. And that's one thing about the monster craze that we forget from the 60s is that they were making gory products back then. They were gearing this gory and grotesque merchandise towards children. You have a lot of gory masks back in that period. And don't forget, the EC comics were out in the 1950s, and those were quite gruesome. I think there's something about kids that adults have never understood, is that they are drawn towards the grotesque and the grand guignol, and there's nothing wrong with that. I was a monster kid. Many of you watching this are probably monster kids. I was fortunate enough to have been a monster kid in the 1970s in that I could appreciate and see all this stuff that came before me from the 50s and 60s as all that was still around. And I was alive during the resurgence of the monster kid craze in the 1970s, where things got just a little bit darker. Because all the films and TV shows we saw at that time kind of had that dark 70s grime on it. We were heading into exploitation film territory. And it was a great time to be weaned on horror and the macabre. Now, some companies did not have the license to the Phantom of the Opera, but they made kind of cool representations of the Phantom of the Opera. And here we have a Collegeville costume called the Ghoul. And it's a ghoul, but so is the Phantom of the Opera. It's kind of a ghoul. And I like this one because it very clearly to me looks like the Phantom of the Opera. It's kind of a representation of the Phantom of the Opera and a Frankenstein monster. And you'll see that when I take it out and we can look at it. Now I love this traditional old Collegeville box. This is one of the older boxes here. It's got those great Halloween graphics on it. Black and white starbursts. You've got a red-haired witch there and a little black cat down in the corner. And you've got the ghoul's face poking out through the cellophane there, along with that awesome Collegeville costume font. This is a Reflect-A-Light mask. It has the light reflective spots. Not my favorite thing to see on the masks, but it did catch the headlight beams of cars, preventing kids from getting hit. And this was sold at Grant's for the princely sum of $1.96. The cat on the side there. Bright for night, wide vision eye holes, colorful mask, flame retarded, made in the USA. And it's a medium. Let's see what the ghoul looks like out of the box. Now, this is a really cool looking mask. And by looking at it, come on. you can clearly see the inspiration of the Phantom of the Opera in this. You've got the turned up nose. You've got that weird toothy grimace that the Phantom always has, where he's got his mouth kind of turned down, and I think it's a representation of what was on the Aurora model kit. Again, it's that picture of James Cagney as the Phantom that everybody saw, where he was imitating Lon Chaney Jr. playing the Phantom. But this is a cool mask, and the 3 little reflected dots up on the top there give it sort of a Frankenstein quality. They give the Phantom or the ghoul here an elongated head, and I can see this as a ghoul. I'm just saying it's Phantom inspired. I'm not saying it's a Phantom of the Opera. It's actually kind of cool to have a ghoul character. All right, that is the cool ghoul. It's a cool ghoul because, ghouls were people that would rob graves and chew on the dead bodies and things like that. So it's kind of a garish monster. And on this one here, again, you've got a lot of that sort of neon funhouse paint. Not standing out as much as the Halco one did, but I don't know if this is that his ear is bleeding because he's got blood coming down from his ear onto his hair. A lot of ghoulish green there. There are those reflected dots again. Got this long hair from living down in the sewers or out in the woods. And he's got that sort of big forehead, that Frankenstein-style forehead. Now, there's ghouls appear in movies quite a bit. More so, they're considered grave robbers, but there are monstrous ghouls. And there's a movie that I really enjoy called The Monster Club. And it's an anthology film, and not a lot of people like it. It's not one of the best anthology films, but it's one I saw a lot growing up. It played in syndication in my market quite a bit. And one of these segments of the film concerns ghouls. And I actually thought it was pretty chilling and pretty frightening as a kid, that segment. And I like that a lot. If you want to see a cool ghoul, again, here we are with the cool ghoul shit. If you want to see a cool ghoul movie, check that out. Another great ghoul movie is Boris Karloff's The Ghoul. It's one of the first films he went back to England to film after he had had some success with the Universal Pictures like Frankenstein, The Old Dark House, etc. Now, I have to be real careful when I put these smocks out. For some reason, they deteriorate over time. I don't know if it's the chemicals that were used in them to make the flame retardant, to make them fireproof, or just the rayon itself and how they were stored over the years. They become quite brittle and fragile. But this smock is in pristine condition. It's a little fragile, but it is not falling apart. And look at the colors on this. The colors on this are just exploding. And again, the reason I'm saying this is the Phantom of the Opera, because very clearly he is coming up out of a well or out of a sewer grate. And he is horrific looking. He's got blood all over his hands, blood red hands. There's spider webs around. There's a spider crawling on him. There's a spider crawling on the chest. He's got hairy armpits and hairy arms and a hairy chest. And for some reason, he's wearing a sleeveless t-shirt, a spaghetti tee, as we say. I don't know what's going on here. And I love just the way the title is spelled out on this smock here, the ghoul. That cool, again, creature feature style font, that horrific font. This almost looks like something you'd see painted on the side of a carnival haunted house or a dark ride. You know, you're going in there, it's like, beware the ghoul. Now, this isn't a Phantom of the Opera costume per se, but it is very clearly, in my mind, inspired by the Phantom of the Opera. And either way, it's a really cool, spooky costume for Halloween. So enjoy. Last but not least, we have this Collegeville knockoff Phantom. It's simply referred to as the Monster. Now, one of the reasons I so dearly love Collegeville is not just because of the licenses that they did obtain, but the types of costumes they'd make for the licenses they didn't obtain. When they didn't have the official license for a property, they would get innovative and make their own version of that property. A classic example being The Brute, one of the all-time greatest knockoff Frankenstein costumes. Now, this costume would run for quite a few seasons. It made its way well into the 80s. And this is a late 70s version of the costume. It's kind of the canary yellow box here. Not my favorite. You've got a ghost down there in the corner giving it a Halloween feel. And on the side here it says tops for trick-or-treat fun, Collegeville costume, Halloween favorites. We've got all these little starbursts and confettis and spirals there. This thing seems much more like a birthday cake to me or a birthday present. I don't like the hot pink costume font up there, but this was Mark's costume. He wore it to his school Halloween parade, I imagine. Mark with a C. And here's the mask. Now, that box wasn't in the best of condition, so I really didn't want to show it. It's kind of falling apart a little bit. I do thankfully have 2 copies of this costume. I've got one in a pristine box in very mint condition. The reason I'm showing this one is because I'm not as concerned with it because it's sort of my backup monster costume. But as I said, Collegeville was notorious for, I wouldn't say ripping off, but at least trying to do their version of what they didn't have the official license of. And this is their version, clearly, of the Phantom of the Opera. Again, we've got all those features that make up Chaney's Phantom. The upturned pig nose, the big bushy eyebrows, the bald head pate there, but with the long hair coming down around the face. And this one almost appears to be Captain Ahab-ish or puritanical like with the way it's got this grayish hair coming down around. Now, this costume is actually, it's a large costume, but the mask here in person is surprisingly small, much smaller than some of the masks that we looked at earlier. But I love it here. We've got that sort of jaundiced, ghoulish yellow paint with the green, dark green highlights for the age lines or the scarred lines of the Phantom. Down on the chin there, he's got sort of this, like a ziti popped, but he's got this bloody mark. And again, there's that rictus, open-mouthed, teeth-bared scream that he's doing, whatever it is. It's that famous look that he has in every picture you see of Chaney's Phantom. Again, I think what they're utilizing is the artwork that was on the cover of the Aurora Monster Kits, because the Aurora Monster Kits really were the first big items that were made to capitalize on the Monster Kid boom. And I'm hoping to get an episode done on those Aurora kits this year. But Halloween snuck up on me so fast, I'm just trying to get this out right now. You want to get a bit closer look here. Now, this mask is in great condition. It's a later mask. Again, I'm thinking this is, he's got those nice wounds on his head or bloody moles, whatever it is. Everything's very yellow about this. They loved the color yellow for this one because you got the yellow box, the yellow mask, the yellow Phantom mask. Now, of course, the rubber band is broken on this one. Again, I think this is a later one, probably late 70s. They did make this one up into the 80s, as I said. And now you can see why this is clearly inspired by the Phantom of the Opera. Take a look at that smock. And, of course, again, it's based off of that James Cagney version of the Phantom of the Opera. You've got flames on the shoulders, flames coming up from the waistline. The Phantom is being consumed in flames or hellfire or whatever. And he's got this awesome scarab necklace around his neck and this rope. I don't know if that's the rope that he was using to swing from the chandelier or if it's the rope holding his cape on. And then his hands are dripping blood, as well as his teeth, giving him almost a vampiric quality or a ghoulish quality. The artist on this really went all out with all the horror tropes. It's almost as if Eric the Phantom is a cannibalistic beast in this. And is he in hell, or is he being consumed by flames in the Paris Opera House? And what's the scarab? And I really love the graphics on this. A lot of people, they joke and they complain about the costumes, that there's a picture of the character on the costume. But I think we're so lucky to have this now in retrospect. These cool graphics and designs and these representations of the various characters on the costumes themselves. What fantastic works of art. And here we've got the Phantom. He's sort of this ghastly blue instead of a ghoulish green. He's got that yellowish tinge, or perhaps the glow from the flames that are consuming him. And now that I think of it, the reason they probably made the mask yellow was to emulate the original Ben Cooper mask. And that will bring us to the end of another episode of Dr. Durant's Sanctum. I was hoping to get a few more episodes out before the big day, but Halloween snuck up on me so fast this year. I may be able to squeeze just one more out. We'll see. And I'm thinking of possibly doing a live on Halloween night, seeing if any of you guys or ghouls are interested in talking about Halloween's past, horror movies, old vintage costumes, monster toys, what have you. Let me know in the comments if you're interested. And I'm also considering doing costume episodes throughout the year. I have so many costumes that I want to showcase, and I can't wait just to showcase them at Halloween time. So let me know if that would be of interest to you as well. So, as I say every year, may you all have 100 Halloweens more, and enjoy being who you chose to be. Walk in beauty, my friends.
This misshapen being became known as the Phantom of the Opera.
Roll on thunder, shine on lightning. The days are long and the nights are frightening. Nothing matters anyway, and that's the hell of it. Winter comes and the winds grow colder. Well, some grow wiser, you just grew older. You never listened anyway, and that's the hell of it. Good for nothing, bad in bed. Nobody likes you and you're better off dead. Goodbye. We've all come to say goodbye. Goodbye. Born defeated, died in vain. Super destructive, you were hooked on pain. And though your music lingers on, well, all of us are glad you're gone. Love yourself cause you love no other. Be no man's fool and be no man's brother. We're all born to die alone, you know. There's a hell of it. Life's a game where they're bound to beat you, and time's a trick they can turn to cheat you. We only wasted anyway, and that's the hell of it. Good for nothing, bad in bed. Nobody likes you and you're better off dead. Goodbye. We've all come to say goodbye. Goodbye. Born defeated, died in vain. Super destructive, you were hooked on pain. And though your music lingers on, all of us are glad you're gone. If I could live my life half as worthlessly as you, I'm convinced that I'd wind up burning too.
We're playing here with the circus.